Good evening. Wanted to thank the coalition for bringing us together this evening to have a really important conversation about our school district. My name is James Farnsworth. I use the pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a proud graduate of St. Paul Public Schools. I'm also a son of two longtime public school teachers as well, and I'm very honored to be a candidate in this November special election for the St. Paul School Board. Of course, early voting has already begun, but the election takes place on November 3rd. I believe that I have the experience in educational policy and governance to be able to navigate the tough conversations we need to be having around systemic racism and institutional barriers in our schools, and I'm very eager to take on those conversations and be a part of those conversations in a collaborative manner, especially during the extremely difficult times we're in right now with distance learning, with all sorts of things related to educational delivery. It's a real chance to reimagine education as we know it and tackle a lot of the barriers that have existed in our schools for underserved students for a long time. And I believe my experience in the district and experience in governance will be unique in contributing to those conversations. So looking forward to our conversation tonight, and thanks again.
Thank you. We're going to jump into questions. All of our questions have been submitted by residents, parents, teachers, people part of the St. Paul Public Schools family. The first question is, tell us what you believe to be the top 3 issues the district is facing and how you plan on addressing them. Please include issues in the district as a whole and issues that are specific to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Go ahead and start with Jim.
My first challenge that I think the district is facing right now is an enrollment issue. And in the past, there have been enrollment issues in the past with the district before. And one group of people who has, in general, saved the district from their own problems has been the communities of color who have come into the city, generally from places that are from like another country. And one of the ways that I think that the district can learn from their history is to understand that it was these people who filled up the seats in buildings in the district. And I think what the district must realize is that it's these people that are leading today that are causing the enrollment to go down. And in the past, services have been built to support people of color coming in, such as the Hmong, East Africans, Latinos, even African Americans coming in from different cities. So I think we need to repeat that practice and strengthen programs that support these communities. And one of the modes of delivering education I'd like to continue to promote is ethnic studies. As I can share a little bit about my experience as a student, in that when I learned core curriculums such as math, reading, and writing, it was really tough for me to understand the connections between the two. I just pretty much did it to finish the task. But as I began to learn more about my history and how my people came here, I began to integrate my understanding of that to those core curriculums, and it really supplemented those curriculums and strengthened my performance in them. And I think that something like this can be done with our students of color population here in St. Paul Public Schools. Another issue that I want to continue to bring up is family engagement. In the past, I think families have been, they haven't necessarily organized. They've sort of just existed in different engagement groups in the district for the district to come to and pull information from. What I like to do is change that. I like to have more training for these parents to enhance and upgrade their leadership roles, improve their organization ability, and improve their relationship with different members of the district, whether they be principals, teachers, administration, school board, or superintendent. I think the better that parents are informed of what's happening in the district and they have relationships with these leaders, the better they are to advocate as a group within themselves, advancing their own interests. Another thing I see in the district as an issue is having students take curriculum that counts as college credits in the district. Now, statistics have shown that students who take advantage of these programs aren't necessarily students of color. They're generally students who are white. And studies have shown that when students take these kinds of courses, it's like there's a light at the end of the tunnel for high school. It gives them the opportunity to know that they can go to college and they can succeed. And I like to have students of color have more access to these programs and be in these programs and succeed so they can continue their education after high school.
The top three issue, one for me is the budget. I believe that our school is underfunded, and the budget cut is really unacceptable because this is not only hurting our students, but also our communities and also our educators. So that's one. So just thinking about what can we do to make sure that we are actually talking about a budget that reflects the needs of our community, and also the needs and the values of our community. And of that, from that, one priority that I am personally invested on is making sure that we have a fully funded ELL program with staff who are actually multilingual, who could support our students. Because when I first came here, not being able to communicate with my teachers in English, and my teachers also having difficulty communicating with me was just really hard. So what does it mean for our city district to actually start thinking about having multilingual teachers in our ELL classrooms? That means that we need to make sure that our schools are fully funded. And the other thing is issues around transparency. How is the decision being made? We need to really start thinking decision as top to down, but more so as a horizontal, making sure that the input from our teachers, educators are considered, making sure that our parent and the family, the communities are at the table when we are talking about budgeting. And this includes, really thinking about how are we inviting the community, and are we actually talking about the time that best work for our community. Like my father, my sister, they can't be, at 8 a.m. meeting because they have to go to work, and then sometimes they have to go pick their kids up. So what do we need to do to be really intentional when we are engaging the parents, the teachers, in the decision-making process, making sure that all the stakeholders are at the table, and not just that, but we are also providing language accessibility. My father, for instance, he wanted to be engaged in my education. He wanted to speak to my educators, but there is that language barrier. So what do we need to do to make sure that we actually have the support that our family needs, the support that our community needs? Because when our parents are supported, our students will thrive, and our educators can do the job that they are really passionate about. And also, the other thing is talking about enrollment. We are losing students. I've been talking to a lot of the teachers right now. I have 9 nieces and nephews, and one of the conversations that we're having right now is where are we losing our students to? And why are the parents choosing to take our students out of public schools? My father, for instance, took me out of public school because he didn't get the support he needed. So what do we need to do to make sure that our parents are supported, the communities are supported in public schools? That means promoting our public school pride. I remember when I first came here, we had a lot of signs, billboard about our public school, bringing that back and having actually an ambassador that goes to the community and talk about our public schools, because Minnesota, we are ranked number 7 best public schools in the U.S. We really need to start talking about it, because we have I'm gonna say this, we have a long way to go in our public school too, but we are also improving. That means that we need to communicate that with the parents and bring in the parents to our schools and talk to them about what can we do to make sure that the school is serving the needs of your children, and also that your needs are also met. This includes having different translators in our schools that can communicate with the parents. The other thing is, I was talking to my niece, and then she said, we really need to start having school pride. That means, different kind of I don't know, just that something that makes our student have pride, be excited to go to the school that they go to. So what do we need to do as a school? What do we need to do as schools and school board members to create that exciting environment? The third issue that I want to talk about is lack of BIPOC teachers. We all know that as schools we have a long way to go. We've also come a long way. From having diverse school board members to intentionally increasing BIPOC teachers. But what we can also do better. So what do we need to do to make sure that we are hiring more BIPOC teachers, that we are hiring more BIPOC social workers, and also not just talking about hiring, but what do we need to do to make sure that they have the support that they need to thrive in that environment? Because the study shows that BIPOC students who have BIPOC teachers thrive because they feel understood. One of the teachers who had the most impact on me is actually somebody who studied back home, but unfortunately she didn't get the chance to transfer her credit here, but she was still able to help the teachers. So at that time she used to sit with me and just invest her time in me after schools and help me out. What do we need to do to have that kind of teachers who understand our students and not just understand them in class, but really think beyond the class and say, where is this student coming from? What can I do to make the student learning process better? What can I do to help this, not just the student, but that student's parents? Because when learning is not only in class, learning also takes place at home. But we need teachers who can understand that. So hiring BIPOC teachers and also investing on those teachers. Those are my priorities. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say some top 3 priorities that I would highlight, specifically impacting BIPOC students and families, would be 1, declining enrollment. I think that is the #1 school district. It's actually a crisis right now, and it's a long-term crisis. We could have an entire forum and conversation dedicated to the reasons why declining enrollment is impacting the school district. But just a few highlight that have also been highlighted by some of my fellow candidates. Our workforce issue. I know from being a student in St. Paul Public Schools, from being a student at the University of Minnesota, it's important to have teachers that look like you in the classroom. So having a more diverse workforce, and that has recruitment ramifications. There's a lot of factors in just recruiting a more diverse workforce that I think is really important. Another issue related to declining enrollment is a programmatic analysis. We need to figure out what families want and what our competitors are offering that families want. I don't have the exact percentage at the top of my head, but it's actually a lot of students and families of color that are leaving the school district because they're not getting the services that they need. So we need to figure out what are other schools offering that St. Paul isn't. And there's a number of strategies to figure that out, including consistent exit surveys of families through the enrollment office, and some other family engagement techniques that a number of folks have been advocating for a long time, but unfortunately isn't happening and need to happen as soon as possible. And the third thing I would mention about declining enrollment is engaging directly with students. The most important constituency to conduct those exit surveys on our students and what they're hearing, what their experiences are, or we're listening to them and making changes accordingly. The second issue that I would bring up is the underfunding of public schools in the state of Minnesota. I think a cornerstone role of a school board member is legislative advocacy and working with school board members from across the state of Minnesota to be down at the Minnesota State Legislature advocating for fully funded public schools. And I think the lack of fully funded public schools, whether it comes to support services or other programming, impacts our most underserved students the most. So that would be the second issue that I'd highlight. And the third issue that I would highlight for a diverse community of students in St. Paul Public Schools is critical ethnic studies and having culturally competent curriculum. I have served as a graduate of the district on the critical ethnic studies, or I think it was called the Multicultural Ethnic Studies Stakeholder Group over the last year, where we've been working to frame up what that ethnic studies course is going to look like in St. Paul Public Schools. There have been students on that stakeholder group, and I've been extremely inspired by their insights and their leadership and how they're helping the district frame this ethnic studies course. And now I'll be going on to serve on the Critical Ethnic Studies Steering Committee, which is essentially phase 2 of that work, of working to bring an ethnic studies course to St. Paul Public Schools, and hopefully, or at least I would certainly advocate for this to be a graduation requirement for students. I think they're going to be piloting it, and then they're going to be solidifying it the year after. So I think that starts in the 2021-2022 school year. I'm not 100% positive, but I think that's the timeline. Either way, it can't happen soon enough. Students have been asking for culturally relevant curriculum for a long time. I remember many public comments in the boardroom, public comments or presentations led by the Student Engagement Advancement Board or others, talking about from students wanting to learn about their culture and their history in St. Paul Public Schools, and I think that's critical. So those would be the three issues that I would highlight that are top of mind, that are really having devastating impacts on our underserved student communities.
Thank you. Since we're on the topic of declining enrollment, you all touched on it in your first question, but in your opinion, what do you believe, and I know that there's some fact finding that needs to happen, but in your opinion, what do you believe is causing it, and what do you believe other schools are offering? We'll go ahead and start.
Yeah, I appreciate the question and the chance to expand a little bit on what I believe is a really number one critical topic for the district. So besides the examples that I touched on in my last answer, I think a couple other things would be just highlighting the programmatic standpoint a little bit. There's been studies done. There was a study commissioned by the formerly known St. Paul Foundation and a few others to get at this question of what do families want? How can we figure out and do more effective engagement with families to figure out what they want? And the lack of a well-rounded education was something that came up. So ensuring that every student has access to arts and music education, making sure every student has access to outdoor education, which of course has become more relevant now due to the current educational climate that we're in. So there's been a number of focusing on electives and critical student engagement points that St. Paul just isn't offering that other schools have been able to offer in the city of St. Paul. I think another thing is the impact of the growth and expansion of charter schools in St. Paul. I think the conversation around the growth and impact that charter schools have had on St. Paul Public Schools is not just a conversation that rests with the St. Paul Public Schools Board of Education. It's a school district issue, it's a city issue, it's a county issue, and it's a state issue. And I think one of the things that I would do if elected as a school board member would be to help convene conversations between our city leaders, between our state leaders, between our school district leaders about trying to do more fact finding per your point earlier, and trying to figure out what are charter schools offering and what are charter schools able to do that the district can't. I think we're all in this together for appropriate and rigorous educational delivery. So what can we learn from one another? How can we partner? How can we do more work in community together with charter schools to figure that out? I know there's been lots of talk of a charter school moratorium. I think there's a lot of fact finding to do on that. And from a legal standpoint, from a governance standpoint, who enforces that? What does that look like? I certainly do not have all those answers. And I think that can be part of the conversation when we do a more holistic and collaborative conversation around that piece of it. So, I would highlight workforce, I would highlight programming, I would highlight needing to do more effective engagement with families to figure out why we have declining enrollment and why families are leaving, and then to actually listen and implement those with all stakeholders around the table, especially students, as we improve the factors that are leading to our district's declining enrollment.
I'm actually going to speak from my personal experience because I am one of the students that left public school too. And the reason is because my father did not find the support that he needed from public school. So I'm going to mention a few key points. One is culturally, we don't have culturally inclusive holidays. I'm Muslim. And if you look at the record for how many Muslim students in this class, about twice a year, we are recorded as absent unless we call schools. So, a lot of families, including mine, felt like they are not supported and they are not centered with policies. The other one is we don't have culturally relevant curriculum. So one of the conversations that my father had with one of the liaison from charter school that recruited my father is that we have studies about, different studies from, for instance, like as a Oromo person, I can get that specific studies if I want to. I could, I would be centered by people who kind of have like the same culture, not only that, but also really speak to the background that we're coming from. So they have that culturally relevant curriculum in those schools. The other one is that something that we are having a conversation with right now is lack of restorative practices. One of the things that one of the parents said was that whenever their child does something, they are suspended or they face consequences. And what do we need to do to, make sure, we need to understand they're kids, and kids being kids, they want to have fun. How do we center them in a way that is caring, in the way that is loving, and actually have a restorative practices that centers them, that instead of, making them face consequences. We've also done a survey with school boards from Minneapolis, school board member Kimberly and Josh Poley in 2018 about why are we losing or why is our enrollment declining, and about 215 people respond to our question. And when we're talking about a survey, a lot of the people that we want to have conversation with, the BIPAC, the 73% BIPAC student, the 40% ELL students, they don't respond to survey questions. So we really need to shift that thoughts, because a lot of families don't have the time or they don't understand what those questions are asking. So it is really unfair to base our policies on surveys. So we really need to change that. So we had this conversation. We went to doors and asked a lot of families about why they are taking their kids from public schools, and those are some of the issues that they mentioned that I am actually currently speaking to school board members in St. Paul on how to actually use some of those key points to better our school, our public school, and also start talking to the community directly. We have rich resources here in St. Paul. What can we do to utilize that resources to actually send a person to the community so they can have a real conversation with our parents on why are you taking, where is your kids going? What better opportunity are you receiving there? What can we do to make it better here? So having that direct conversation that will make actually families feel like they are invested on, that they are cared for, and that their voice is valued. Because we cannot just send a survey home and expect them to return, and we really need to change, expecting our communities to come to us as leaders. We need to start going to them. So just based on my experiences, it is not having culturally inclusive holiday, not having culturally relevant curriculum, not having a restorative practice that centers those kids in a loving way, and also not having a liaison that is actually rooted in the community. Somebody who comes from the community and actually can say, my kids goes to this public schools, they graduated from this public school, this is what they're getting. And say, what can I support you with? And also, what can I do to make it, not just that, also like somebody who have relationship with school board, educators, and the community, somebody who can understand all that process and also just bring that knowledge to the community. We need to, those are some of the things that I am working on, and I'm going to bring to the school board.
Feel free to use additional ways if you like.
Can I have you repeat that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question, I think all of you touched on declining enrollment. In your opinion, what do you believe is causing it, and what do you believe is the purpose or the reason they're going to other schools or other teams?
Given that this is just opinion, and given that we still need to do a lot of fact finding,
Yes.
what I could say is from my communication with other home families, and I want to say, to start out with, that I don't speak for the entire home community, I don't speak for entire home families, I can only speak to the family, about the families that I talk to. And what it comes down to is just navigating a whole bureaucracy in order to just get basic needs for your families. The easy example I can give for me is that I have to go to at least 10 different people in the school building just to have re-intervention for my daughter because she's falling behind in school. But on the same note, my son can be suspended by a substitute teacher. It doesn't even have to be the regular teacher, So it's practices like that that just sends a message to families from my community that says that we're not really interested in working with you. So what I want to say is that the Hmong families that are in St. Paul public schools right now, they've been through the system before. They were kids in the 80s and 90s, and they're the parents sending their kids to the school system now. And they don't have tolerance to go through the bureaucracy of advocating for their child. What they're going to do is they're just going to send their kids to another school, a charter school. Now, I don't like to see that happen. I still think the best services are in the school district. My children have special needs, and I know for a fact that the best special education services are in St. Paul public schools, not in charter schools, and that's why I stay. But I can understand, so again, it goes back to my points about enrollment, in that we need to develop curriculum that reflects our students' experiences in the city, and we need to build strong relationships with families, not just having them in groups and pulling information from them, but really building relationships with leaderships, with teachers, with principals, with administrative leaders, with school board, with superintendents. We can do that through the parent advisory councils. These are parents who already volunteer their time. They're not getting paid. They're volunteering their time. That's gold. We need to develop their leadership. These are the parents that that want to stay here. So that's what I have to say about that.
Okay. Next question is going to be a quick yes or no, and we'll start with Jamilla. If elected, would you be willing to fund a hip hop studies course? That's the first question. Second one is, if elected, and you all touched on this also, if elected, would you be willing to support cultural and ethnic studies and require all students to do that? So first one, we can talk about yes or no for the hip hop studies class, and then the second one is for the ethnic studies.
Yes to hip hop class and yes to ethnic studies. Do I need to elaborate?
No, just yes or no. Thank you. Yeah.
I would say yes to that, and without taking too much time elaborating, I'm reminded of Jeff Chang's Can't Stop, Won't Stop. And this was done like 15 years ago, but I thought it was an amazing read about how ethnic studies can be grounded in hip hop and how that just gets the young people's brains just working. And I learned as much from them as I do teaching them, so that would be amazing to see something like that happen.
Yes and yes to both questions, 100%.
Thank you. All right, next question. How will you advance racial equity to make St. Paul Public Schools a better environment for Black, Indigenous, and students of color, educators, and administrative staff? And then we can go ahead and start with James.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and of course there are a lot of different avenues we could talk about related to central and really important racial equity work that needs to happen. I want to highlight something that I had said earlier as kind of a grounding comment, in that we're really in a unique time in education, in reimagining everything from curriculum to district services to delivery, to how we talk about race and work with race in the classroom. And I think it's really a transformative time, and we need to use transformative thinking in terms of how we center the values of racial justice and equity and disrupting racism and systemic racism in our schools and communities. So I think we're at a really unique time to tackle this. It's kind of my grounding comment. A few things besides, and I want to say it again because I really think it's that important, accelerating the timeline and getting this culturally relevant curriculum that starts and doesn't end, that starts with the ethnic studies elective for students. And I think that not only has an impact on students, but I think that has an impact on educators. There's a lot of educators that want to teach ethnic studies. There's a lot of educators that want to teach things like a hip hop elective that we were just talking about, which, as Director Vu pointed out, has broader ramifications than just what it sounds in promoting racial equity in the classroom. So I think, again, starting with getting that ethnic studies course done ASAP. It's already taken too long, but there's some great foundational work that was grounded and really centered students that would be benefiting from those electives. There's foundational work going on, and we can get that done as soon as possible. I think the other thing that I would mention is bringing more restorative practices into the classroom. I think restorative practices are really important to making the classroom community and the school community and our district community safe and welcoming as possible. So I think that's really important. And then I think in any of this work, and I'm going to use an example with the school safety plan that SPPS is currently undergoing. As most folks know, SPPS got rid of school resource officers in high schools. That's a vote that I would have supported had I been on the board, but since I wasn't on the board, and now we're thinking about, what is the plan moving forward. I think when building and having conversations around issues like school safety that are so foundational to students' everyday experience in the classroom, that we need to center the voices of, in this particular case, students who are often underserved and underrepresented and disadvantaged by traditional methods of building security that utilize SROs and others. And I think that St. Paul Public Schools, by the creation of the Student Engagement and Advancement Board and student representation directly to the school board, and that is something that I helped start back in 2015 when I was finishing up being a student in SPPS. through channels like that and through other channels that specifically center the voices of underrepresented students and educators as well in those conversations. I think SPPS has started to do that and has done some of that important work in situations like the building safety plan that I've mentioned. But in terms of how to more broadly talk about advancing the goals of racial equity and disrupting racism that happens in too many classrooms, and not just in St. Paul Public Schools, but across the entire nation and specifically our state, it's important to center that work and ground that work with the communities that are impacted the most.
Jim. You're welcome.
I just have to have you repeat the question one more time.
Yeah, absolutely. How will you advance racial equity to make St. Paul Public Schools a better environment for Black, Indigenous, and students of color, educators, and administrative staff?
Okay, so I think the best way to answer this question is to find practices that are already working in the district. I think it's not like this work isn't being done, it's just that we need to grow the work that is effective and make it a district-wide scale. Going back to the question of enrollment, it's no secret that some of the leaders of these Hmong charter schools were previous leaders in St. Paul Public Schools. And once upon a time, they had great ideas in St. Paul Public Schools that just didn't get followed through, didn't get worked on, or didn't get scaled up to a district-wide practice. And now you see what happens. They went off and they start their own charter school, and they're just poaching Hmong kids out of St. Paul Public Schools. I want to highlight that that practice is still happening today. We have brilliant teachers of color in St. Paul Public Schools that know how to engage with students of color. That's already working. We don't need to reinvent the wheel on that. And that goes the same for, that goes the same for administrators. That goes the same for school board members like myself. You know, I think we need to do an assessment of what works in the district, and we need to take those best practices and implement it on a district-wide scale.
I think we need to start listening to and center the leadership of BIPOC students and staffs and educators. The solution is with the community, and they know what works best for BIPOC students, and we need to uplift their voice. We need to center their leadership and make sure that at every making table that they are present, because those closest to the pain are closest to the solution. And so my answer will be uplifting, investing, and centering the leadership of BIPOC students, teachers, parents, and staffs, to educators, to actually have a say on what is working and what is not working in class and school building.
All right, the next question. This question was submitted by a parent. The hiring process for Black, Indigenous, and teachers of color stops in the Human Resources Department because of a required test. This test is a barrier. A similar test is given to potential teachers in Minneapolis. However, there have been a number of teachers who have failed this test in St. Paul, who then went on to Minneapolis and were hired on. Are you aware that this test exists, and what will you do to remove this type of barrier and other barriers in the hiring process? Jamilla, we'll go ahead and start with you.
I am aware of the problem, and we've been having a conversation around this with school board members, actually. And I think my answer to this will be to make the process of actually hiring BIPOC teachers I don't agree with the word inclusive a lot, because inclusive means that we just bring them to the borderline and okay, we include it now. We need to start centering them. It is time that when we speak about equitable environment and hiring process, we need to actually start talking about what are some of the systematic and institutional barriers that is in place that is hindering those teachers from actually getting in to teach our students. So removing that and having intentional conversation around why is this happening. I don't have an answer to the question that you just asked, because this is a conversation that we recently started having. But my answer would be having an intentional conversation about this and other systematic and institutional barriers that is, that is hindering our BIPOC educators who are eager to be in class and hindering them from being in class. So just having that conversation.
So to answer the question, no, I am not familiar about this with this particular test requirement in the hiring process for St. Paul Public Schools. But as someone with an HR background, I'm intrigued by it and believe that I would be able to bring some unique skills to the table, specifically with an intervention of hiring processes and trying to figure out what are the institutional barriers that we have that exist for hiring a diverse workforce. I know through actually some recent conversation with a friend of mine who had a concern about this exact same issue related to test requirement and related to writing samples and other things in the hiring process of her nonprofit. And doing a little bit of research about that, I did come across some more general information, again, not specific to this specific test in St. Paul Public Schools, but am aware of those barriers of writing samples, of different testing requirements in a onboarding or hiring process that are huge barriers to underserved communities. So definitely committed to looking into that, doing whatever we can to remove that, doing benchmarking from an HR standpoint on what we can do to open that up and to remove that barrier, and definitely committed to using my HR background to tackle that, and would be very interested and committed to doing that.
So I think I'm going to take a different approach on this, just based on my experiences of tests of this matter, where they really determine if you enter into a field or not. What I'd like to do is add more criteria to the test and sort of factor that into the rubric of hiring that particular person. Maybe we don't necessarily need to get rid of the test, but we need to add additional criteria that really reflects where that person is coming from and their strengths. And then you get a more complete evaluation in addition to that test. So I think a practice like that would be more helpful. It would definitely open the door for more people to want to come, because when I think of hiring processes, and particularly of communities of color, these are the people who are the best of the best of our community. They're no slackers. And if they see an inequitable practice that's keeping them from being in the place they want to be, they're just going to go somewhere else because they have that expertise, they have that knowledge, and they have that ability to do it. So adding criteria onto this test, factoring that into the entire evaluation, make it more enticing for people to apply, make it more enticing for more people to get in.
All right. This is our last question of the evening before we move on to online questions. Do we have any questions for people at home? No. Okay. All right. So last question, and then we'll move into closing statements. How do you plan on working with teachers, students, and parents, and all other stakeholders should a teacher strike happen? We'll go ahead and we'll just start with
Sort of puts me in a position type of question because I'm already an interim board member. So I think what I would do is, first of all, I want to make sure that I'm on the same page with the rest of my board members on this. I want to make sure that I'm lockstep with the administration, I'm lockstep with parents and students, and I want to hear exactly all the perspectives of teachers that I can, not just from teacher union leadership, right? But from as many perspectives as I can gather. And depending on what I find out, that's where I'm gonna and strike of the fence. I think that whenever something like this happens, there's more to the story than just one side or the other. And as an interim board member, it's really my job to find out what more there is to it. And it doesn't necessarily help me to jump to one side or the other. It's an investigative process that I need to complete, and only at the last moment do I have to choose. That's when I choose.
Yeah. How do you plan on working with teachers, students, parents, and all other stakeholders should a teacher strike happen?
Yes, I'm a strong believer in co-governance. So that means that I'm gonna be at the decision-making table with everyone who sent me there, from our unions to the parents to the teachers and everyone, because those are the people who elect us to be there. So I'm going to listen to with the board members, to our teachers, listen to their concerns, and take the time to really have that conversation around what is going on, what can we do to make it better, and I will be there to listen, and I will be there to support our educators.
Thank you for this question. A few things, taking a values-based approach. I think in uncertain times such as a teacher strike, communication is really important. That's something that I tried to help with as a community member and as an alumni of the district this past spring through social media, is try to facilitate communication in a healthy way around when a strike happens, a lot of families and there's a lot of uncertainty that's created within families and others in the community. And I think having compassion and understanding, regardless of where you may come down on whether you support the strike or not, having compassion and understanding around why people are striking, the passion in which they're bringing to why teachers are striking, and that it's all about our kids at the end of the day. So having that compassion and understanding. So I would be a facilitator of communication, practice collaborative decision making with fellow board members. There's a lot of logistics around school board members actively participating in negotiations, being on that side of the table, and from an HR standpoint, just different things around participating in negotiations. But regardless of what's going on, I'm a strong believer in being out in the community as much as possible, facilitating conversation as appropriate as a school board member who's also then, by extension, a party to the negotiations, and just encouraging people to practice that compassion and understanding and empathy about that. At the end of the day, our kids are in the middle of this, and our students, and how important that is that we get this right, and that we approach situations like that, regardless of what your role is, in a collaborative manner. I think those are the values that I would bring to a conversation around, or an environment around a strike, and working with educators and families and students and community members.
Thank you. Any questions from folks in the audience? So we'll go ahead and we'll move into closing statements. And since we ended over here, you can just go ahead and start.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the East Metro Coalition for bringing us together this evening and having these important conversations that center in racial equity and center in our schools and our students and our educators and families. I'm eager to take my experience that I've had as a student in St. Paul Public Schools and as a community member to get to work during this really crucial time for strong local leadership. There's a lot of things that are happening and not happening at the federal level and at the state level that require really strong, experienced local leaders of our local school district. And as a graduate, I have a personal affinity for the school district, and I've seen firsthand, time after time after time, how a strong school and our strong public school system means a strong community. So as a graduate of SPPS, as a son of two educators, and as someone who has had education, public education in particular, instilled in me as a student and as a son of teachers throughout my entire life, I'm very eager to get to work on behalf of the educators and the families and the students of the St. Paul Public Schools. If you're interested in learning more about me or my campaign, you can visit my website at james4forspps.com. And I hope to earn your vote during this early voting period or on November 3rd on Election Day. And thanks again for having us here tonight.
Thank you so much to all the organizers who created this space for us. I want to say that I firmly believe that every child deserves a quality higher education and representation throughout all level of government. I am running to represent students and families who are often left out of the decisions and offer them the opportunity and support I needed when I was a student. I am prepared to listen deeply, accept accountability, and move forward with compassion and a solution-oriented mindset. I am clear about why I am running and what I will be bringing to the table. I'm excited to step up and serve my community as a member of St. Paul School Board. And I just want to say thank you so much for your support. And please visit jamillafforstudent.com to learn more about me and join our community. Thanks again and have a wonderful night.
So again, I'm Jim Vu, and one of the reasons why I'm running for the school board is that the success of the district is inexorably tied to the success of my children who are in the district. So whatever's happening in the school district via distance learning, moving on to hybrid, success or failure, it's impacting my family. I can see it happening to my kids. And I have practical knowledge of teaching and learning, the actual delivery of teaching and learning plans coming down to schools and how it impacts my kids. So I also have lots of years of experience in the district, engaging with the district. So I'm familiar with the staff and teachers and administration. I'm ready to serve the people and the families in the district. And I think that people who are in the district can relate to things like that, can relate to having kids in the district, and can relate to having that investment.